Hello everybody. In this video I wanted to show you how I do the level design for the prototype of my game using my own game engine. It all starts in Blender. Over there I can build up my ideas and iterate over them until they meet the expectations. One of the first things I usually do is to realize the dimensions of the level. I want to have a small level, but it has to match perfectly with the dimensions of the player. This is why I place the player mesh. From here, I can build up the different areas and paths, keeping in mind the dimensions of the player. Afterwards, I can start building the different areas. This is a stealth game, and this is why the prototype is going to be a labyrinth. A labyrinth which has different paths, which are mainly narrow paths, where the player need to hide and prevent being spotted from the enemies. Another core mechanic of the game is that the player is able to climb up different walls. And this is why the levels are designed having in mind the height of the player. As you can see here, he's going to be able to climb up the lower parts in white, the middle parts, which are in this reddish color, and finally the blue parts. But also, I placed different walls because the enemies can spot the player through these tiny holes, which are meant to be windows, and that gives also a nice idea for the gameplay where the player can hide behind the walls but has to be careful to not being spotted through the windows from enemies that are lying somewhere else. Finally, I have created all different items and blocks I need to build up the different areas. Mostly the blocks are going to be used to create hiding areas for the player, and then we also have there some gates, some keys, and other items that are going to be used for the gameplay. The next step is to import all these meshes into my engine. I am using obj type of files, and here you have the class which is in charge of performing the operations to read and convert all these files into vertices and indices, which will be then passed to the GPU for the rendering of these meshes. I am also making use of the materials from Blender, which are then converted into materials that my engine understands. It is important to note here that this process is only done in the editor while we are developing the game. When we go to production, this data is converted into a binary file, which is much faster to load. Finally, the engine is done that when it loaded up, it will look into the different directories within the assets folder and try to find files that can be converted in any asset which is used in the engine. For instance, meshes, OBJ files, or Collada files for skin meshes. Moving now to the editor, after importing all the meshes and creating all game entities and assigning the meshes to the renderers, this is how the level looks like. There is also some water and some other effects, but this is the main level prototype. As you can see here on the left, I have the different entities, prototype lower, prototype middle, prototype upper, prototype walls that correspond to the different ground areas. In the editor, my main task is to build up the different areas, which means adding the different obstacles, the different objects, all key elements and key items, and in general, building up the gameplay. As you can see, the editor allows me to disable or enable different areas, so it makes my life easier when I'm designing them and when I'm placing the different objects. It is important to note that in Blender we only saw the meshes, but now we have to create all the collisions for these meshes. And here is where it comes all these entities called New Collider, which I create with a tool which makes this process a bit faster than it could be to manually define the size and the position. Here is where we also create the climbable areas. As you can see, it is a trigger collider that the player can interact with and allow it to move up to the next platform. Let's navigate over the level. Here we can see this green box, which is a pushable box. The player can interact with it to move it around and, for instance, block the path of the enemy or its field of view. This is a throwable object. The player can grab it and throw it somewhere in the level to create a distraction for the enemies. Here we have one of the keys. This key can be grabbed by the player and used to open different gates. For this prototype layer we have two different kind of keys, and here are the doors that can be opened with the keys. This gate will move down when the player tries to open it having the right key. The same happens for this gate over here. And here we have our player patiently waiting for starting the level. Let's now navigate to other areas of the level. Here we have a switch. The player can interact with it to trigger some cutscenes. In this case, it will move down this gate over here, allowing the player to move farther in the level. Over here, we can see an area where the player is supposed to crawl to pass through. There are other mechanics in game, but by now this is what I want to test for the prototype level. Finally, before starting the test, we have to place the enemies. And this is how the system works. There are these patrol systems, which has these actions that you can see on the right side, which are very simple actions: move, wait, look at. And this is how I'm defining the different behaviors for the different enemies. It's time to test the level. Here we are in the game mode. I speed up a bit the video to make it a bit faster for you, but I wanted to make a whole playthrough of the game level so you can see the different mechanics and how are you supposed to play this game. The level have different objects strategically placed there for you to hide and prevent being spotted from the enemies. The enemies have fields of view that can be turned on or off to facilitate your movement decisions. As you can see, crawling and being crouched is one of the most important features of the game. It is essential to keep you safe from being spotted from the enemies. Besides, it can be used to pass through obstacles and get to secret areas. We just grab this key and now it is in our inventory. Note that the icons are still not implemented, so this is a big placeholder. We can now move forward and use this key to open the gate. Note that the whole tempo of the game is rather slow. The idea is that the player can wait somewhere safe, look around, and decide the next move. This is also why we allow to zoom out and zoom in, so we have an overview of the whole level. If you perform the wrong move, you will be spotted by an enemy and you have a few seconds to get out of the sight. Note that I'm crawling close to the enemy because when the player is walking, it's producing some noise that can make the enemy be aware of his presence behind. We just grabbed a throwable ball that we are saving for later. Now we are triggering the switch and we see how the gate goes down. So let's make use of this throwable ball. We can select it in the inventory and now decide where we want to throw it. Let's put it somewhere there. Then the enemy gets distracted by the rock or ball or whatever I decide this item is going to be. And then we could move forward and pass without being spotted. Let's now make use of this pushable object. Let's first get the view of the enemy. We place the pushable object over there, and then we can move around. And as you can see, the field of view is cut by the object, so the player is not spotted, and we can make it through. Over here, we are in a bit of a more tricky area. There is a diamond that we want to collect inside there, but the enemy is patrolling inside this area. So first of all, we have to try to sneak out. We are getting in now, and we are able to get it, even though we got spotted and now again and now again. I'm not the best player, but currently the game does nothing with the spotty, so I can test this properly. The next action I would like to do now is to stop the patrolling of this enemy, which would make our life easier farther away. So what we do now is to move this object there. So now we have cut the patrolling, so this enemy cannot move over there, and we are safe to move farther. The next area is still under development, but I hope that you enjoyed the level design and how the game looks, and I would really appreciate if you can give me some feedback about the gameplay, some ideas, what would you change, what would you improve. There is a lot to do. This is a prototype and there is a lot of issues in the visual area that I am aware, but please feel free to leave a comment behind.